Welcome to another cross-training tutorial. Today what we're going to do is we're going to take our engineering paper JPEG that we created last time from InDesign into Photoshop or GIMP to basically create kind of a generic engineering template in which we can do our engineering or other math problems on. So recall that InDesign does not have built-in math tools like Microsoft Word or Excel. And even with Microsoft Word and Excel, you still have to kind of build an equation, use the equation editor, and it kind of takes a little bit of time to do that. The other issue that we have a lot of times with Microsoft Word and Excel, and even with InDesign, is when you have to do sketching. It's very difficult to create a freehand sketch. So again, this is why we're going to look at the application Photoshop and applications like GIMP, basically raster editors, to allow us a little bit more freedom for sketching and merging in math equations and basically merging text, numbers with images, with graphs, diagrams, tables, so on and so forth. So what we're going to do here is the very first thing we're going to do is create a new Photoshop document. So I'm using Adobe Photoshop version 6. It's relatively old. So if you want to use GIMP with this, you definitely can. So what I will do is at the end of this tutorial, I will create a link where you can download the end result of this step, and it should be openable within the application GIMP, which is the free version of Photoshop, and you should be able to do pretty much all the things that you see here, but all the steps should be done already for you. So let's go ahead and create a new Photoshop document. So I'm going to go to File, and then I'm going to go to New, and you'll see this dialog here that opens. So before we continue, you're probably wondering, well, why don't we just open the JPEG from last time? We could do that, but I want the settings of my document, my Photoshop document, to be driven by what I specify here and not from the default settings that the JPEG has. So this is why we create just a whole new one. Alright, so over here where it says width, I'm going to change this to inches. And paper is, standard paper is usually 8.5. And then the height is 11 inches. And we're going to want to maintain this 300 resolution. Over here where it says color mode, we definitely want to use the red, green, blue, so that way we can, use some colors later. It'll be kind of important when we do the psychrometric charts. Background content, I always set it to transparent. So we're going to follow these settings here. We can also give it a name if you want, so maybe I'll call it template ENGG paper. And then click OK. And before we click OK, notice over here where it says image size. This is showing you how much resources it's going to use up. So this is like 21.4 megs of resources. And this is like either video memory or system memory. So if you're not sure how much memory you have, because sometimes this file can get rather huge and use up a lot of memory, and you'll find that your application is running a little bit slow, you can right click on your taskbar and go to the task manager. I'm just trying to remember where it is. And then here where it says show more details, just make that bigger. And then go over here to performance. And over here, this is telling you how much memory. So I'm using about 11 gigs out of 128. And then in this thing, I guess it does have a GPU memory thing. So it's telling me that I'm using about 17% of my 24 gigabytes. So it's not too bad. So this basically tells me I could probably have a pretty large file and it's not going to complain too much. So all computers are different, so you'll want to check yours and make sure yours can, be able to handle this. Basically, it'll use up a lot of memory as you build more layers. So if you find out that you run out of system resources about halfway through, you can just start another Photoshop file, and then this memory thing kind of starts over. Alright, so from here I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And we get a default layer here that's created. If we go to this image drop down and go to image size, it's going to tell us, what all the settings were set for it. So we can see that it is indeed 8.5 by 11. If you want to see the rulers just like we had in the other application, you can go to this view drop down and click on rulers, and you'll see a ruler here just like from before. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And what I'm going to do with this default layer is I'm going to rename it to white, and basically what that means is paper white. And then I'm going to do another new layer. So over here on the right side we have this panel area, and in this layers tab we have a series of buttons across the bottom, and this button here allows us to create group, basically layer, or they're kind of like folders where you can put your layers inside of them. The button right next to it is the new layer button, and then this one is the trash can. If you want to delete a layer, you can also right click on it and you'll see all these options here. You can delete the layer, but I don't need to delete a layer, I actually need to create one, so I'm going to do the new layer thing. And these layers also kind of work like layers of like trace paper, where the thing on the bottom is underneath this. So let me just, while I have this white selected, let me go over here to the left side, which is another toolbar, and click on this paint bucket tool. So yours might be set to like the gradient tool, and notice that the button has a little triangle in the corner, and the little triangle in the corner means that there's more commands stacked underneath here. So if you just press and hold the left mouse button, it will kind of create a little fold out here. I'm still holding the left mouse button, by the way, to show me the other commands that are stacked under this button. So just roll your mouse over the one that you want and then release the left mouse button, and then that tool will become available. So if I was to click here right now, it's going to color in my entire canvas black, and that's because down here in the color picker area the fill is set to black. So I'm going to double click the fill, and I want to do white, so I'm going to drag all the way up here to the upper left corner. So remember, the closer to 255 the lighter, so all of these RGB settings are set to 255, so this should be white. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and then click in here, and it fills in the whole thing white. So now going back to over here on the right side to my layer panel, again recall the thing that is underneath is going to be underneath the top thing. So right now my layer 1 is transparent, so it's seeing through to this white layer. So I'll just turn off the white layer for now. That way it goes back to that transparent mode. And what I'm going to do is I want to bring in my engineering paper template that I created from the last step and have it on this layer 1. So I might rename this layer 1 to ENGG paper. And I want to have my JPEG on this layer. So to do that, I'm going to click on File and go to Open. And I'm going to look for that JPEG that I created. So I'm going to go into my coursework, into my template, to practice. Remember, we created this and saved it here from last step. So I'll just click Open. And as soon as I click Open, notice now we have two tabs here at the top. So these are kind of like two separate documents that we have open. So on the engineering paper one, I basically need to select all of this, copy it, and then paste it over here into this ENGG paper layer. So over here on the left side again, these are my tools. I have the move tool, and then I have the rectangle marquee tool. So again, all of these buttons fold out. So I'm just going to use the default one, and this is going to allow me to select things on this JPEG. So I'm going to select the whole thing, so some are just in the black space. I'll just click and drag, and then just window in this entire thing. And then I can either type Control-C for copy, or I can go up here to Edit and choose Copy, and then go over here to the engineering paper template, select the engineering paper layer, and then either press Control-V on the keyboard or do an edit to paste. And it should fit perfectly in there. And the reason why it fits perfectly in here, because recall we made this also 8.5 by 11 and with a 300 DPI. So this other document here we made 8.5 by 11 with 300 DPI. So the size and the resolution is the same, so it should just paste perfectly right on top. You shouldn't have to do anything. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn on that white background layer again. So if I turn things on and off, you can kind of see what I'm referring to when I say the thing that is on top is what you'll see first. So if you turn that layer off, you'll see the thing underneath. So recall that our lines here are quite bold, and so is our logo. And it's going to be kind of hard to do any kind of problems on this since the lines are kind of like really bold and it might give you a headache or something. So over here on the right side, while we have the engineering layer selected, and I have it selected, you can tell because it's kind of highlighted blue. If I click on the white, you can see it changes to there. So make sure you have the ENGG paper selected, and then up here, just not far, but up here towards the top, it says opacity. I'm going to change the opacity. And opacity is basically transparency. So I found just through trial and error, something between 25 and 35% works quite well. So let me go all the way down to like maybe 30%. And I think for me, visually, I prefer the 33%. So now you can see that all of the grid lines are pushed back, but we're also able to maintain our line hierarchy. So let me just zoom in a little bit. So when you're working on it, you'll probably be zoomed in at this level, or maybe at this level, depending upon what you prefer. And you know, this is still quite workable. And you may need to experiment a little bit, like you may need to actually print this when we get to the printing phase, just to see what this looks like on paper if your professor prefers paper submissions. But if your professor prefers digital submissions, you could probably even go lighter, like maybe to 25%. So this is what 25% looks like. It's not too much different from the other one, but I think you get the general idea that the transparency of your paper is going to be completely customizable, and you can always go back in here at any time and change this. Or if you want, you can go all the way. Let's see what 20% looks like. So that's 20%. So again, it's just a matter of personal preference, what you prefer. So again, I want to stress that if you have to print this and turn this in, make sure you do a couple of test prints to make sure you have the opacity set correctly. Alright, so moving on to the next thing. Before I continue, I'm going to save this. So I'm going to do a save as. And I'm going to save it into my 05 practice folder. And the reason why is because this is just going to be a generic template that I could use for any course. So I'm going to call it template ENGG paper for now, and then click save. And then I'm going to leave it with, you know, that PSD file extension or whatever the GIMP file extension is, and click OK. And the other thing that we can do in Photoshop is we can add folders. So right now I have 2 layers in here, and as I get to solving problems later, I'm going to find that I'm going to have a lot of layers, actually a ton of layers. So to avoid confusion and kind of keep my layers list very organized, this can get quite long, is I'm actually going to make some folders. So the very first folder I'm going to make is going to be called template. And it's just kind of just generic, just template. And then I can grab these layers and just drag and drop them right inside of that template. And I want to make sure that I keep the order where the engineering paper is on top, because see what happened here, it's on bottom and now we can't see our grid. So we want to make sure it is on top. And I might actually make this a little bit darker because I don't know how it's going to appear in my video. So I want to make sure ENGG paper is on top. So again, if the ENGG paper is on the bottom, this is what it looks like. And if this is on top, this is what it looks like. And the next thing we need to talk about are going to be some common tools that you're going to use within this document. So let me just go ahead and close out this JPEG that we opened earlier. That way we just have our template. So over here on the left side, some common tools that you'll use. One of them is this zoom tool. And this allows you to zoom in. You can also click and drag, and depending upon your computer, it might do like a real-time zoom in and zoom out. So it'll give you like a custom zoom in and zoom out. If you want to zoom out just by clicking, press the Alt key on your keyboard and then just left click and it will zoom out. And what I'm probably going to do is maximize my window so it takes up my full screen here. That way I can see the whole thing. And then zoom in some more. So I usually work at about this scale. The next tool that you'll be interested in is the pan tool. So you can click on the pan tool. The keyboard shortcut for pan is the space bar. So let's just say that I'm in the zoom in, zoom out tool, and I want to just pan to the left or to the right without actually having to click on the pan tool itself. Well, you can press the space bar and then hold it down, and then you can, click left and right and pan across. But as soon as I let my finger off of the space bar, it goes back to your previous tool. The next tool, obviously, we're going to use a lot of is this brush tool. So this will allow us to actually sketch on the screen. Notice that I have like a little circle with a slash going through it, meaning that it's not allowed or something. And that's because over here in my layers list to the right side, I don't have my engineering paper selected. And I'm not actually going to draw on my engineering paper, so for this tutorial series I'm not going to do any sketching or anything, simply because I don't want to draw on my actual engineering paper layer. But I just wanted to explain to you that this is the brush tool. And then usually when we use the brush tool, we'll need to configure this setting up here at the top, which is the size of the brush. And I usually use something between 2 or 3 pixels. And we'll experiment with that a little bit later. And then here you have an option to choose the type of brush you want to use. And I usually use something that has a very sharp edge, not something that kind of fades out, because it becomes very difficult to read and it may not print very well either. So I usually use a brush that has a very sharp edge and that doesn't have a fade. Over here we can also make our brush have an opacity, and then we can also control the flow of our brush. So if you're using something like a Wacom tablet, and if you press really hard, you'll have a really dark stroke. But if you press really light, you can have a really light stroke. So it kind of simulates graphite a little bit. But I leave all of these at 100, the default setting, and I don't do anything else with it. The other thing that I like to do, and I've just kind of learned this over the years after going through the 3 calc sequence classes and doing differential equations, is that you may not use the entire sheet of paper. Like if you write your equations in a way where it's very vertical or it doesn't go all the way across the paper, you'll find that you only use up about half the page. So one thing that I like to do is create a guide that happens towards the middle here. So I'll go over here to my ruler. I'll just click and drag and make a little guide here to kind of make a kind of an invisible split. So 8.5, the half of 8.5 is right about here. It says 4.503. You're probably thinking, well, that doesn't sound right since it's 8.5 by 11, but recall that our margins are set a certain way. So while I have this selected, let me try to get 4.5. It'll be a little bit difficult to get it exact. It doesn't really need to be exact. It just needs to be somewhere like halfway to give you an indication as you start writing, oh, I've reached the halfway point of my paper. I need to do a new line. So right there, this little line here, it's not going to print. So it's just a guide for you to help remind you that you've reached the halfway point of your paper. So it's time to, kind of carriage return over to the next line to write things. So think of this as kind of like a 2-column document. You'll have problems on the left side and you'll have problems on the right side. So if you choose to do this, always remember that people typically read from left to right and from top to bottom. So you don't want to go in reverse direction. So try to be consistent by going from left to right and then top down. And then when you run out of room on the left side, you can go over here to the right side and continue solving problems. So let's see, let's take a look at our template here. It's looking pretty good. There's a couple more things I want to talk about in regards to this toolbar over here. Some other commands that you may use. This one here is the eraser tool. So if you have one of those stylus, usually the end of the stylus, the opposite end that you write with, will automatically flip it over to eraser for you. This is the select tool. We've already used it once. It can also be extremely useful when solving problems, because let's just say that you chose to go down a path in solving a problem and it ends up being like 10 lines long and you realize this isn't working very well. I don't think it's going to give me the desired solution, but you don't want to erase it. So what you can do is you can select it all, You can do a cut and a paste. It'll make a new layer for the thing that you're not sure about, and then you can turn that layer off and then just start a whole new layer to go down a path that you think is right. So I've many times have done that and gone down a path that I thought was right, and it ended up not being right, and I had to revert back to the thing that I cut and pasted, which I'm extremely glad that I didn't erase, because I didn't have to, start that over. So this tool is extremely powerful and helpful to use. And then this one up here, this is the move tool. So after you cut and paste something, you can move it around on the screen, or you can turn the layer on and off. So how do we turn a layer on and off? So over here on the right side, notice that we have a little eye here. So if I click on the eye, it turns off that layer. And if I click on it again, it turns it back on. So it's just a toggle. And let's just say you want everything in this group to be turned off. Well, you can do that by turning off the eye up here at the group level. So anything that's contained within that folder will get turned off. So we've just finished setting up our template, and what I'm going to do is just click save. That way our template gets saved. And if you're not interested in going through all of this that I just showed you, I will definitely create a link for you to download this file, which will be at this state.